do we actually start our journey with data? Today I want to, well, I'll just lay out the agenda. I'd like to talk today about the fact that at the beginning we have this data, but on its own, data doesn't tell us much. For something meaningful to come out of this data, we need to dig a little deeper into it. So just like I showed yesterday with that slide on this topic, we have data, we have raw data, then we have some aggregations, then visualizations, and finally some forecasts, which also give us additional possibilities. And here we have this first stage, which is the raw data. The raw data from Firebase contains information such as the event date, which user it concerned, information about how the user was acquired, for example, the acquisition channel or campaign. However, even this raw data is already quite idealized in the sense that when it comes to user attribution channels, it's not that straightforward. Sessions, event names, that is information about whether the user, for example, added our product to the cart, purchased it, or viewed it. Here, for the purposes of this demo, let's assume we have a streaming platform that sells its services in the form of subscriptions, whether monthly, quarterly, or yearly, but you can also purchase, for example, an additional single product if you want to watch a specific movie. We have information about which product a given event concerned. Price information if the event was related to a specific product, and value information if it was a purchase. And also information about the device the user was using. And basically, I'm showing this to start the whole story. To illustrate that, based on this kind of data alone, we aren't really able to say, for example, whether a Google campaign is better than a Meta Ads campaign, or whether we should invest more in campaign number 1 or campaign number 2. To answer such a question, we need to dive deeper into this data. And this is where the dashboard comes in, a place where we can present this data in a tabular form, for example. I'll quickly go over what's in the filters at the top. So, of course, we have the dates for which we're displaying, the information, the user acquisition network, campaigns, and the platform, and the report type. I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. And here's the first point I'd like you to consider. If we want to measure the effectiveness of our marketing campaigns, we need to know how much revenue is generated by users acquired through those campaigns. And we can look at this in a cohort-based way, meaning by the date the user was acquired. There are many businesses where, in fact, all the revenue is generated on the day the user is acquired, and the rest doesn't concern us. However, in the case of a subscription-based or business, or even in gaming, this cash in the revenue is spread out over time. And we want to know how much revenue the users acquired on a given day through a specific campaign have brought us. So, quickly going through the table, we have information about the acquisition date, the number of users acquired on a given day, and the total revenue they generated. And here is exactly the kind of trap you need to watch out for, because the total revenue, of course, will be much lower for users acquired yesterday than for those acquired, for example, 2 weeks ago. That's why it's worth considering this in the context of revenue on a specific day, right? Here, this revenue will probably be the highest precisely on day 0, that is, when we acquire the user, when they purchase the subscription for the first time. However, later on they might extend it or buy additional products. That's why we should also look at revenues in the following days. Here I have suggested looking at revenue on day 0, on day 14. And if we scroll further, there is also revenue on day 100 and 120. And now this. For obvious reasons, in some places here the value is 0, because for those last 14 days, we can't say how much those users earned in 14 days. That's why this data is actually only available after 14 days. And we can see, for example, that what users generated on day 0 will become a greater value in the future. Here, 5,000, let's say, zlotys. However, for D120 and LTV D120, meaning on the 120th day after acquiring the user, we can only look at that after 120 days. Does such a comparison tell us anything on its own? It definitely tells us more than raw data. But it's much easier to analyze such data through visualization, and on this chart, the same 3 values as above are presented. That is LTV on day 0, day 14, and day 120. However, we can notice here that the LTV dropped significantly at a certain point. So we have this, we can infer from this that something happened at this point that caused users to stop generating revenue for us. They stopped bringing us income. And of course, we can dig deeper into this later to find out why it happened, whether it was on a specific platform, and so on. For the purposes of this demo, since it's also time limited, let's assume it's because the holiday season ended. People stopped having a lot of free time to watch movies and use streaming platforms. So they simply cancelled their subscriptions and no longer generate as much revenue. These charts for LTV D120 also intersect at the appropriate time, and for D14 they also end at the right moment, which is why we don't have that history here. Is the information about LTV alone enough for us to determine whether a campaign is profitable or not? Actually, I haven't really talked about campaigns yet, so moving on to campaigns, we can also make such a breakdown by campaigns instead of by dates, and later we can filter it down to a specific week, for example. However, what I wanted to show here is that we have these campaigns and we know how much, on average, a user acquired through a specific campaign generates. However, this information alone, firstly, does not tell us what the actual cost of acquiring a specific user is, because we might have a campaign targeted at premium users, and in that case, they are much more expensive than an average user. Secondly, it is very difficult to evaluate campaigns after 120 days. That is to say, to put it mildly, it's inefficient. If we only determine after 120 days that our campaign was either not good or was good. Why after 120 days? Well, because there are businesses where the return on investment is spread out over time and in reality. For example, in some businesses, we only actually target for the user to pay off on the 90th day after we've acquired them. And then either we wait those 90 days to find out if the campaign made sense, or we can use forecasts for that. Here I have a clever filter. Of course, underneath, it's a bit more complicated. However, what forecasts give us is that based on this e-commerce or Firebase data, we are able, after just a few days of a user's activity in the app, to determine with quite high accuracy how that user will behave in the future. So, in reality, for those users acquired on March 31st, we can already determine that over the long term, after 120 days, they bring us, well, 150 zlotys in this particular case, which also allows us to see on the chart how this will continue to fluctuate. This also gives us an opportunity. I don't know if you noticed, but one of those campaigns previously didn't have any LTV value at all. However, this gives us the ability to now determine that this campaign, which was launched within the last 120 days, and about which we previously didn't know, what would actually happen over those 120 days. At this point, we already have this information. It's visible. And here we can also see that one of these campaigns has a significantly higher return per user than the others. That is this campaign, 171. Here we can see that the projected return per user is over 2,000. All right, so based on something like this, we might come to the conclusion, why not just put all the money into this campaign? And in this case, combining these different data sources comes to our aid. So we don't rely solely on the revenue information, but we also add the cost information to it. Cost from Google Ads, from Meta Ads. We have various data regarding campaign costs, but when it comes to these basic breakdowns, we are able to extract them from the data, no? And thanks to that, we can also have information, for example, about the cost incurred for each campaign, which we should also consider on a specific day. We shouldn't compare the revenue on the 14th day with the cost up to the previous day, meaning up to yesterday, because then we would be taking the cost for the last 14 days. We won't take the revenue for the last 14 days and we'll end up with nonsense results. So that's something to watch out for here as well. Once we have the revenue and the costs, we can calculate ROAS, which is the return on advertising, pan spend. And here, using the example of a campaign number 171, but we can see that not only did it generate the most revenue for us, but it also incurred the highest costs. And in reality, we acquired very few users thanks to it. So this was the campaign where, despite the fact that the average user generated a lot of revenue, they also cost a lot. And in the end, if we look at the results, whether on day 1, day 14, or day 120, they are similar across these campaigns. And basically, thanks to this kind of data, first of all, we can make better decisions, not just relying on LTV, which, as you can see, can sometimes be a bit misleading. We can look at ROAS, although that's not a perfect metric either, because advertising costs aren't the only expenses a company incurs when acquiring new users. In the case of e-commerce, we'll also have different margins on different products. So that's another factor worth considering. So when it comes to the very act of combining data, it gives us the ability to make more accurate decisions. As for search forecasts, they definitely speed up the decision-making process because we don't have to wait, say, 120 days. Good. We can make that decision after 3, 4, or maybe 7 days. That's basically all I wanted to talk about today.
Thanks, Lukasz. Do we have any questions for this session?